I was drafted and I went in as a conscientious objector.
Conscientious objector, was it an objection to the Vietnam War specifically or to war in general?
To war in general. I was raised strict Seventh-day Adventist, and it was anti-war. My father and my grandfather were both more than 100% anti-war and did not want me to go in.
So were there conversations then about, um, because the route you take, is, you went in as a conscientious objector, but as your hat says, you become a combat medic. Were there discussions beforehand about other routes that you might take as a conscientious objector?
Yes, my both my father and grandfather did not want me to register, and they my grandfather told me of different ways to avoid active duty if I did register. One was get my girlfriend pregnant, another was to go to uh, continue in school, go to college, and or other ways to avoid being in the military.
Did the possibility of going to Canada or Sweden come up?
Well, my grandfather, when I was 16, had bought me a brand new Suzuki X6 Hustler motorcycle to leave the country.
Really?
And one morning, my mother had no knowledge of this at all. One morning, I went to school normal. My sister was 1 year ahead of me. And in the high school, I waited until the first bell rang, watched my sister making sure she left the area. And then I walked over to my grandfather's house, which was about a mile away, got on the motorcycle and went to Mexicali and spent that first night in Mexicali out of the country. That was before registering.
With the thought that you would just stay out of the United States and avoid service that way.
Yes.
So you have these other options, and you have family members who are actively encouraging you not to go into the army at all. So why did you finally make the choice to go ahead and enter the army, though, as a conscientious objector?
Well, when I got down to Mexico, I drove the next day down to Lukeville, which is in Arizona, but I was in Mexico. Went down and the I had no papers, and so the at a check station, the Mexicans turned me around, and I went back up to Lukeville, sat on my motorcycle, and thought, "Is this how I want to live my life?" And I thought, "No." And I called my mother. She had no clue where I was. Told her where I was and asked her not to contact the police, that I would be home in a couple days. And I rode my bike that night back up into California, Southern California, spent that night. The next morning, rode back up to Modesto, where I lived at the time.
And soon thereafter went into the army.
Yeah, I registered then. I was 16 at the time, just close to 17, and at 18 registered, and which required to do. And I knew, I was pretty sure that I would be going to Vietnam at the time. When I got back to Modesto, I took the motorcycle back to my grandfather, told him I didn't keep my part of the bargain. He could have the motorcycle back. And he looked at me and said, "No, keep it, enjoy it. If you go in the military, you'll go to Vietnam and you'll die." So I kept the motorcycle, went into the military, and there isn't anyone more proud of their service than I am.
He told you that you would go to Vietnam and die, but actually you went to Vietnam and helped others live.
Yes.
At this time, before you get to Vietnam, while you're going through your training, but I mean, as a medic in the Army, there's a really, really good chance you're going to go to Vietnam. Um, what did that conflict mean to you, or just what was your thinking about it? So some veterans say, I saw it as an adventure. Some veterans say, I just saw it as something that I had to do. Um, Others say that they, felt very motivated to, fight the communists. What was your own thinking about the war and your role in it before you experienced anything?
I went in the service because I felt a pride in America, my country, wanted to do the service. When I received orders at the end of my AIT in Fort Sam Houston for Vietnam, I had a 30-day leave, and it was like a death sentence. At that time, it took me a couple days to get over that, to get an appetite back. But I felt we were doing good in Vietnam, anti-communist, but it also, I felt it was a death sentence.
So by death sentence, you mean that you you had sometimes you hear this from vets, just kind of a sense of certainty that you weren't going to come back.
I felt I was not going to return. Yes. As we were flying over, we arrived over Vietnam, and others on the plane were returning from Hawaii. And one of the guys next to me pointed to the ground and he said, "You see those tiny little light circles? Those are the safe place. Everything else is not safe." And it was an interesting arrival. Um,
Were the
when
light
they,
circles, I'm sorry, were the light circles like the fire bases or something, or?
that's correct. Yeah, fire support bases or division bases. Yes. And they were tiny from that altitude.
What what was your own, so far as you can remember, when you're on that plane, um, starting your descent into Long Bin, so far as you can remember, what was your own frame of mind at that time?
It was all unknown, it was all unknown. And it was just like blank space. When we arrived, opened the door, it was like walking into an oven. It was very intense heat and humidity. We were told if there were explosions, rush to a quote unquote safe area uh, to get down and be protected. That did not happen.
And at midnight, it was very hot and humid.
Yes.
Wow. How long was it before you had the first experience, the first thing that drove home to the point that you were in a war zone, something you knew, but at some point that knowledge becomes concrete?
When I arrived at headquarters company of 2nd or 14th, they offered me a 45. They held it out to me, even though they knew I was a CO. I did not take it. Then I was attached to Delta Company. And when I was going out the very first time, Jim Deppie came over, a rifleman came over, asked, "Where's your weapon, Doc?" I said, "I don't carry one." He said in an angry voice, "Fuck you. If the shit hits the fan, you're on your own." And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what they think of me.
Wow.
And I went over and said, "Jim, I'm sorry you feel that way, but if it does hit the fan and you're the one wounded, I'll be there for you." Later, when he was getting short, they would ask the guys, "What position do you want to man?" And at times, Jim Deppie would shout out, "I'll be Doc's bodyguard." So it went from "fuck you" to Doc's bodyguard. My first experience in the field was after being attached about 2 weeks. We were on an ambush patrol, and my best friend at the time was shot. And that was oh my gosh, this is what it's really going to be like. John Jacqueline Robinson, a black dude, rifleman, kind of took me under his wing. And for the 2 weeks that I was with Delta Company, he would explain things and kind of give me a heads up on where they were going, what to expect. And on that particular ambush, he was positioned out on the last person, and I was out next to him on the rice paddy dike. And I told him I thought I should be at the center of the position with the lieutenant and the radio transmission operator. So I moved to that position. At about 10 o'clock, I was asleep, heard shouting, gook, gook, and rifle shots, and I was suddenly awakened. There was no moon or very little, and the artillery fired flares for us so we could see, and we found John sitting in the rice paddy in about 4 inches of water. I went to him, and he had a sucking chest wound.
And is this the first significant wound that you dealt with in Vietnam?
That was the very first casualty, very first wound, and my very first experience in quote unquote combat.
So what happened then with you? At that point, when you saw the wound, was it one of those things that veterans say that you're not, if the question is what were you thinking, the answer is I wasn't thinking anything, just training kicked in. And in a way, you almost become kind of an automaton, just responding, doing what you've learned in training. Is that how you describe that?
Exactly. I took cut his shirt open, saw it was a sucking chest wound. I could see the air and blood bubble as he would breathe. I put my Vaseline gauze bandage over that, bandaged him, called for an urgent dust off. Now, this is nighttime out in a rice paddy. And when the dust off helicopter ambulance arrived with lights on, it was stressful. I knew that we were obviously uh, very easily targets. The helicopter landed. We got John on the stretcher on his side with his wound on the bottom. We put him on the helicopter, and the medic on the helicopter started shouting, "Get him off, get him off." And I asked why, and the helicopter medic showed me claymore mine wires that had been attached to either John or to that stretcher were hanging over the side. So if they had taken off, they would have taken claymore mines with them. I, standing in water, knew I was grounded. The skids of the helicopter were in water. I knew it was grounded. I took out my scissors, and knowing the helicopter rotors did generate static electricity, I cut the wires. I was actually surprised when nothing exploded, and I held the wires up, showing them, and they took him to the hospital. I was not allowed, or I was not going to allow that helicopter to leave without my friend. The next morning, I found out that John had passed away. I went to the doctor, our Captain Hannah, and told him, described what I had done in the field. He told me I had done everything correct. And I went out, sat on the berm by myself and cried. And that was that was the one and only time I cried in Vietnam. I was proud of myself for quote unquote toughening up. But
And this happens about 2 weeks after you arrive in country?
That was 2 weeks after I was attached to Delta Company, the infantry unit. Yes.
And did that experience confirm in your mind that sense you had that, I mean, because you've got a long way to go. You've got more than 11 months to go in country. I guess if you take out R&R, you've got about 11 months to go in country. Um, did that experience kind of confirm in your mind that there's no way I'm surviving this?
Well, that was so this is what it's going to be like, and you're just going to have to toughen up and tolerate it. As a combat medics at that time, they were taken offline at 6 months and taken back to division or to the base, and then a young new medic would be replacing me. So I knew I that had approximately 6 months left online.
6 months in a combat role.
Correct.
I
Yes.
see. Okay. Okay. Um, and you said that that was the only time you cried, and then after that, I'm not again in these next months that you have. And is that because partly you just realized that, you know, one of the job descriptions of the medic is not to let things get to you, because if things get to you, you won't be able to respond as effectively?
Well, the when you're in training and all of that stuff, it it doesn't really prepare you for the real facts of life. And when you are placed in that position, you change, and you have to change for your own survival. Uh, you asked if how I was treated. I was very aware that they took care of me. We were out on, or one occasion, it may have been before that. We were taking a break, and I started to walk over to look at something, and they shouted out, "Freeze, Doc," and I did. They came over and asked, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "I wanted to walk over and look at that." And they said, "Don't you ever do that. If you want to see something, you tell us, we'll go over, check it out first, and then you can go look at it." And after that, it was an education on the reality of the dangers. And after that, not one time did I ever ask them to check something out for me. When we would take a break, I would sit on my fanny because I didn't want to put myself at any additional risk or them at any additional risk. But they took care of me, they looked out for me.
What part of Vietnam were you in? Were you in Three Corps there?
I was in Three Corps, the Cu Chi tunnel area. Uh, we were about, we were near Trang Bang. We were about 25 miles, a little bit northwest of Cu Chi.
And how did your service in these 6 months when you're in the field, how did that, what was there kind of a rhythm to it? Would you be on a fire base for 2 days and then out in the field for a week and kind of that rotation? Or, you know, what if there was any such thing as a typical 2 week period, what would that look like?
Well, we would go out. First of all, we were at Fire Support Base Patton 2, which was considered the perfect fire base. It was just outstanding. We were always on the line bunkers, and half of the platoon would go out on ambushes at, at night. As the medic, I would always go out. Half the platoon would stay back and be on the guard duty. But as a combat medic, I always had to go out with the guys. I didn't go to any briefings because my job was just to be there. And I didn't need to know where we were going or why we were going or any of that information. So I was just to be there. Uh, I didn't know what day of the week it was. I didn't know what month it was. It's just day after day. We would go out during the day for search and destroys, go back at night, and go out on ambush patrols.
Wow. So in that 6 month period, would you say that most days in that period you were involved in one way or another in some kind of potential combat operation?
Yes, yes. When I was out with half the platoon with a squad, I always, even though I was a non-combatant, I would always pull guard duty because it would give each guy about another 20 minutes of sleep. But I always had the radio so I could break squelch. And I always had a rifleman beside me that knew if I woke him up, it was important. Every infantryman in my platoon had a bandage in their elastic band on their steel pot.
Yeah.
And when somebody was wounded or hurt, they would come over, offer me their bandage. I only opened my A bag a few times because they would always come and assist.
Wow.
On one of the occasions, one of our guys had tripped a booby trap. The area that we were in was highly booby trapped. And the casualty was stunned and wasn't able to speak. And I was holding his hand and I would ask him questions. And one squeeze of his hand was yes, and two was no. And an infantryman came over and asked, "Can I help you, Doc?" I told him yes, hold his hand and get give me the answers. And he did. That individual was dusted off. Later, that infantryman came over and said, "I don't know how you do this." But it was when we heard the call medic, it was almost just like blinders went on. You were not aware of anything except getting to that wounded person or persons and giving them the aid without any idea or uh, uh, any thought of personal risk. It was all 100% find that wounded person, take care of that wounded person.
Do you have any idea or an estimate of how many wounded guys you worked with in your 6 months in the field?
Every time I called in a dust off for a routine, if the person just wasn't feeling well or urgent, every time we had a dust off come in, we would pop smoke. So a smoke grenade so the helicopter could see our location and wind. And every time I called one in, I saved that pin and I attached that pin to my helmet liner until it was filled. And then I quit saving them. And I have pictures of those pins, and there could be at least 24 pins around that. So I called in at least 24, not all urgent, of course, but I called in at least 24 dust offs during my 6 month time. Once we dusted off a person, we had no clue if they survived or not. On one particular time, we were flown out for a bushmaster. A bushmaster we called when we were flown out, and we would spend 2 or 3 days out in the field. We would do search and destroys in the daytime, set up an ambush at night, search and destroys, ambush, search and destroys, ambush. We wouldn't go back to the fire support base. And on this particular occasion, when we landed, they discovered a booby trap, and our rear security sergeant and radio transmission operator stayed behind to set a charge to destroy it. They called in, and I was always with a radio transmission operator. They called in and said, "Fire in the hole in 10 minutes." And I had bought a watch with a bezel so I could keep track of time. set that bezel in about a minute or two, there was a major explosion, and I knew it was serious. So I ran back. The sergeant was standing there, and the RTO was on his back on the ground. I stood at his feet, and his chest had just been opened up. He was killed instantly. I called, yelling for an urgent dust off, and a forward observer uh, heard me and started walking toward me. And I was looking at him, and there was a dead stick that was 6 or 7 foot tall. He reached up, grabbed that dead stick, and he was blown up. So now there are three booby traps, three explosions, and I actually froze. I knew the person I was standing over had expired. I was afraid to lift my feet. I was afraid to shift my weight. Was absolutely frozen in fear. And I just stood there searching the ground on both sides, looking for tripwires or, um, and then after a time, I thought, I can't, if it's my time, it's my time. And so we got him on the helicopter, got the other officer on the helicopter. And that was the only time that I froze. That was the only time. But I was afraid to even shift my weight.
So this forward observer is walking towards you, and then he grabs this stick.
Yes.
Um, how close was he to you when that happened, roughly?
He was probably 25 feet from me, 25, 30 feet from me. It was a distance.
And was he killed also?
No, not that I know of. But he was not killed instantly. The person I was standing over, I knew was there. Yeah, he was done.
And when you unfroze, just determined, I've got to get back to work, basically. Did you then go and work on the forward observer?
Another medic had reached him and took care of him. On one particular time, we were going to go out to a rubber plantation. And there were many Michelin rubber plantations near us. And the lieutenant was talking to the platoon and told where we were going, and told us that we were under direct orders. If we were to receive fire, we were under orders to not return fire. And someone in the platoon, kind of in a low voice, said, "Fuck you. If I'm shot at, I'm shooting back." And the lieutenant angrily said, "I'll court martial you." So it was, when I arrived, I thought that we were there to help and do good. And it didn't take long to discover that we weren't wanted. The Vietnamese people really didn't want us there. And so our thinking, in my group at least, was do everything that we are asked to do, exactly do everything as we were told to do, but do it safely and take care of each other to come home alive.
How did you interpret this order that came down? If you're shot at, even in that case, I mean, I've heard cases where, you can't shoot until you've been shot at. But this order is even if you shot at, don't shoot back. Did you have any idea what the rationale for that order was, and how did you interpret that?
Yeah, it was to protect the rubber trees. Any damage to the rubber trees, the government would be responsible for. And so they didn't want to damage any rubber trees. And the Vietnamese NVA and the Viet Cong knew that, and so they would stay in that area. Captain Byrd was going out to become responsible for a higher position. And Captain Branch took him out in a loach to show him the area. And they were over a rubber plantation, and Captain Branch thought he saw something. And so he asked the Huey pilot to lower the aircraft, blow the tree branches to the side so he could see below. They were shot down, and the both Captain Branch and Captain Bird were killed. That was over a rubber plantation.
I've heard this before. These Michelin rubber plantations, um, if the trees were damaged, then the U.S. government had to compensate the Michelin rubber company. Um, did you interpret that? I mean, as I hear that, my interpretation is that the government cares more about the trees, which the figure I've heard is $500 per tree. If a tree is damaged, then that's the compensation, $500 per tree. I don't know if that's right or not. That's the number I've heard, that the government cares more about the trees than it does about the soldiers that they've sent to Vietnam. That's the interpretation I come to sitting in my nice air-conditioned office here. What was the interpretation you came to, if any, in 3 Corps late 1969?
You know, that's interesting because we were security around the fire support base. We were the people that went out on ambushes to protect the fire support base. When we were back at the fire support base, we were not allowed to use the showers that were in the fire support base. In the afternoons, they would out in the open. There was a 4 pallets on the ground with a tower in the center with 4 shower heads, and they would turn on a pump. This was just out in the open. There was no protection around it. And that was where infantry could go take a shower at certain times in the afternoon. I was out there several times, and it seemed that every time I'm out there getting a shower, the donut dollies would come. That Huey would circle the base and then land. And the first few times I tried to cover myself, and then I thought, F them, if I'm taking my shower, and did. But we were not allowed. We were there to protect them. We were the word cannon fodder comes to mind. We were there to protect them. They were important, and we were expendable. That was everyone in my platoon was thinking that.
You mean in this case, protecting the donut dollies who are coming in?
When protecting that fire support base, everyone in that base, whether they were a cook or whether they were artillery or whoever they were, we were the peons to protect them because they were important. We were not.
I see what you're saying. And so the fire base is very important. You're going to protect that. But you
Yes.
guys out in the field, you can get shot at, but if you get shot at from a rubber tree plantation, you can't shoot back.
Yeah.
Um, so then what's the war about? If this is about, you know, what is the war? I mean, if you arrive in Vietnam thinking, this is a struggle against communism, and it is, right? Maybe in some abstract, big picture sense, but when you're dealing with things like this, what is the war about for you guys on the ground?
Our thinking for my group, my platoon, uh, our thinking was we were drafted or we joined the Army. We were sent to Vietnam or went through basic and AIT training. And then this was our 1-year test to see if we had learned our lessons well. And so Vietnam was like the final test, 1 year in Vietnam to see if we learned our lessons well. And our focus was to do everything, and we did everything as we were asked to do. and do it well, do it properly, but we did it and thinking of protecting each other to take care of each other to all come home alive, to go home alive. I
So,
was there. I was there during the Vietnamization. The first part, we would go out and the ARVNs would be flown out behind us as rear security. And then it changed due to Vietnamization to where the ARVNs would go out and we would fly out as their rear security. When we went out, we went to each checkpoint and we did the proper uh, checking, search and destroy, went to each position, search and destroy, and then we were picked up. When we went out with the ARVNs, we would go out to the first search and destroy, and we would sit on our ass all day. Just before pickup time, we would jump up and run over, hurry quickly over to the pickup zone. They would call in saying, "We're here, we're there, we're there, we're there," and then they would get picked up. So they did not do the search and destroys properly.
well, so yeah, I wanted to ask you then, what was your perception of the ARVN forces? Did you have any confidence whatsoever that that they were capable of helping South Vietnam stand on its own?
We figured that there was no win, that it was just a game, because how can you win when you don't do things properly? And it's their country, and and part of it was I had personally a feeling for the Vietnamese people. During the daytime, we controlled everything. During the nighttime, the Viet Cong and NVA controlled everything. And if I'm Vietnamese and I have a family and a North Vietnamese officer or person comes or a Viet Cong person comes and tells me I'm going to set up booby traps around your area, give me rice for free, and I'll tell you where they are. Um, or if you refuse to do that, I won't tell you. So then I'm at risk because my family and I could get blown up. So I give them the free rice. When we would move into an area, we would realize that the villagers were running away, and we knew that we were going into a booby trapped area because they, if we got hurt, we might strike back at them, and so they would run for their safety. So you have to kind of understand the villagers' thinking. They were caught between it. So it was an ugly place to be, an ugly situation. On one particular occasion, we were rear security. The ARVNs hit a booby trap, and it was white phosphorus. Phosphorus burns until there's no oxygen. And I was treating them. Lieutenant Darzan, my officer that was in charge of the platoon, was about 15 feet, 10 feet to my front and right. He went down to his knee. His right foot had gone into a punji pit, but because it was just on the edge, he didn't fall in. The ARVNs were burning from the white phosphorus. I went and couldn't do much for them. I poured the water from my canteen over one person's face, trying to relieve the pain. I was going to relieve his fatigues, and you know how the boots are bloused, and I lifted the fabric up. His skin was bloused to fit that fabric of the uniform, and I carefully put it back, trying not to break that blister for him, and dusted them off. But we treated everyone. We treated people in the aid stations when I was offline that we knew. In fact, I have pictures of a Papasan. He's all bloody. And we figured that he probably got wounded setting a booby trap for us, but we treated him properly, correctly.
So when you're out on search and destroy missions, then what kinds of things does that involve? Search and destroy is sort of a blanket term that's used, but what kinds of things would those missions involve?
Well, we'd be searching for tunnel openings or in fact, sometimes we had a helicopter gunship circling, and they would tell us where they saw someone popping a head out to look at us. But we were searching for weapons. We were searching for their R&R, quote unquote, or their hospital areas, just any place that they might be during the nighttime. The conditions were interesting. The uh, places to sleep was just on the ground. And when I came home, a lot of Vietnam veterans after that refused to go camping. I go often, but I require a bivy sack or a tent. I won't sleep out in the open. I The water, I carried two canteens. And when we were out, it was very humid. The water, I would put two um, tablets in it to quote unquote disinfect it before drinking it. And I did that on occasion. We were told on one occasion to stay in because they were going to be spraying Agent Orange in the area. At that particular instance, I needed to go to the latrine that night, and it was like being I felt a dampness on my skin. I don't know if it was Agent Orange spray or not. Um, so there were other things. And the guys that I was with, when we would go out and spend time out in the field, they would carry a bar of soap. And during monsoon season, a cloud would pass, heavy downpour of rain, and they would lather up, strip down quickly, lather up. And about that time, the cloud would pass, and they would jump in the creek or a bomb crater to rinse off. Uh, so that was part of life.
Um, how about snakes, leeches, mosquitoes, fire ants?
Oh, mosquitoes were. I did get a mosquito net that would go just cover my face. And at night, I would put it around my steel pot and pin it to my shirt. And on some mornings, I'd wake up and my nose would be red from the mosquitoes. My skin would touch that net and they would get me. But there would actually be a cloud over you at night.
You're constantly under attack. If you're not being ambushed, the mosquitoes are after you, the leeches are after you, the fire ants are after you. You got snakes all over the place. It just seems like no matter, even when things are quiet, you're still under some kind of attack. Um, and I have no way of understanding. I mean, after a while, do you just kind of psychologically just kind of shut down at some point? I mean, a person can only take so much.
You just deal with it. Vietnam changed everyone that was there in some way. We were out with APC's armored personnel carriers on one occasion, and I was riding on top, and we got to an area that they stopped, and we had to jump off and search an area in front of them. And I jumped down, and I'm badass. I'm just kind of pushing through the tall elephant grass, and I feel a sting or like a needle prick, and I think, oh, I'm in a area that has a rose bush or needles types, and I feel another again. I feel another sting, and I stop and I feel another and another. I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm not moving. And I look down and there's this red ant with his back up just biting my arm. And I smacked him with my hand and didn't hurt it. I hit it again, didn't hurt it, hit it again, didn't hurt it. I had to pick it off. And then I feel another. I climbed back up on the APC and yelled ants. And I started doing a damn strip on the APC, and other guys came around and they picked one after another ants off my body. On my 21st birthday, I was in Cucci, and I went into the NCO club to celebrate, and I put $20 on the bar. They lined up, and I think mixed drinks at that time were 15 cents a piece, or maybe 25 cents a piece. Beer was 10 cents. And another person came in, put $20 on the bar, and I had drinks lined up in front of me. It was a shot and a half of vodka, a shot and a half of gin, and then the rest of the glass with orange juice. And Sergeant Khan came in and said a Chinook had been shot down, and there were Delta Company, my unit, on it, and they didn't know who was injured or not. It kind of put a wet blanket on the celebration. Next morning at the aid station, I was told that they were at 12th Evac Division Hospital, and I went over and talked to one of the guys that was on that helicopter. He had been burned severely, so was sitting up. He described what happened to him, and after me experiencing what I had experienced, just listening to him, I went out and was physically ill. I had the heaves. He survived. Kerry J. Pratt was on that. He died 2 days later from burns. I was aware that I changed. I mentioned earlier that I only had tears one time, and I was proud of myself for that. And as I was on the flight back, the Freedom Bird back, I sat on that plane wondering if I had lost the ability to feel. I, I, every time after I have been out of the service or home, every time I have tears, I'm both thankful and grateful that I still have that ability to feel. You know, the people that I was with in my platoon, I, as a conscious objector, did not carry a weapon. 100% of my safety depended on them, and they depended on me to take care of them when they were wounded. During my time out in the field, I did not drink one beer when we were on stand down. I did not take one aspirin. I did not take one decongestant. I was wanting to be 100% of the time. And after I got offline and was back at Cucci, that was different. But as I flew home, I felt that I stood just as tall as anyone else, that I had been tested and I had performed, I had stood up to the test. In my office, I was a dispensing optician. I owned the business. And you see on behind me a picture of my platoon, and below that a article that was in the Tropic Lightning News published in January 12, 1970. I had put that on my wall in my business, and every time someone would look at it, I would go over and talk to them. I had at least 3 ladies come to me after and personally apologize for protesting us. And they said it wasn't us, it wasn't me or the people in Vietnam that they were protesting. It was the politics and the government. But they personally apologized for what they had said and done back at that time.